I am Kyle with Orange Focus Media. Please like and subscribe for more educational content. And welcome to episode 2 of the Search for the Hardest Money. In episode 1, we discussed the fiat currency system and the monetary history of the United States. And in today's episode, we are going to be discussing Bitcoin. And more specifically, I'm going to be just presenting the basics of what Bitcoin is so you can get a simple understanding going forward. And before we jump into what Bitcoin is, it's important to note that gold failed as a medium of exchange due to its lack of portability and divisibility. Gold needed to be papered over. And what I mean by that is the gold that was in the bank vaults needed to be represented by dollar bills for it to be portable and divisible enough to use as a medium of exchange. Sending gold from the US to Europe also required millions of dollars. It needed a warship staffed with soldiers with guns just for it to safely get across the ocean and into Europe. This was very expensive. And on top of this led to the ability for corruption, printing more paper claims for the gold than the actual gold that existed. And here I just have a picture of what that would look like. You have one gold coin sitting in the bank vault, and then you have two paper claims of that gold representing it. And over time, this Ponzi scheme got exposed, and this is actually what eventually led us off of the gold standard, is that too many people with these claims for gold were trying to redeem the gold coin at the bank, so we stopped all redeemability. What is the monetary dilemma we are trying to solve here? And that is, the best form of money should be able to move value across physical space and time. Dollars are really good at moving value across space. Nowadays, you can send dollars from the US to Europe with a very little fee, and it just goes across wire in the ocean. It's very easy to do that. And gold is very good at moving value across time. You can, with almost certainty, bring your time and energy with you into the future by holding gold because, as we learned in episode 1, gold holds its value very well over time due to its low inflation rate. Meanwhile, dollars are very bad at moving value across time due to their inflation. Introducing Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer, decentralized, proof-of-work, digital asset that moves value across space and time. Introduced in 2009 as a response to the Great Financial Crisis by the anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto. And so we are going to unpack exactly what Bitcoin is together in this episode, and specifically what I mean by this definition up here with all of these words that you may not know what they mean. First, let's start with the basics. What is the blockchain? And the blockchain is simply a ledger. The blockchain is a ledger with all of the Bitcoin transactions, and it is what stores how much Bitcoin each wallet has. And so I have an example here that Kyle sends 5 Bitcoin to John. Now John's wallet stores that Bitcoin. Tim sends 4 Bitcoin to Alex. Alex's wallet now stores that Bitcoin. And so this continues throughout time, and Bitcoin has a block time of 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, the entire Bitcoin blockchain is audited, and it has a clear example of who owes who money, and that money is then stored in the rightful owner's wallet. The Bitcoin blockchain is audited by nodes and miners. They do the accounting for each block, confirming that all of the Bitcoin transactions add up and that they are in their rightful owners' wallets. And Bitcoin miners use large-scale computing power to guess a random puzzle associated to each block, and when they guess the right answer to the puzzle, they will get a reward for their work. So let's look at what just the broad definition of decentralized means. And so here I have a diagram below of a centralized system and a decentralized system. And the centralized system is fragile, and all messages must pass through one authority before reaching the person who is supposed to receive the message. Meanwhile, a decentralized system is anti-fragile, and there's multiple pathways to get your message to the desired person. And so you can imagine if you're in this centralized system here, if you're person A and you're trying to get your message to person B, your message must pass through one central authority before your message can reach that person. Now, if you're in a decentralized system, your message can have multiple pathways, so it's much less fragile for your message to get to the desired person. And so that is just what a broad definition of decentralized means. And there's many examples. For example, the internet is a decentralized system. Email, the protocol for sending emails, SMTP, is a decentralized system. And so your message can get to the desired person without going through a certain authority. And so it's just important to understand that, because as I go through what Bitcoin is, we are going to see multiple examples of how Bitcoin is decentralized. So where is this blockchain, all of the transactions of Bitcoin, stored? So it is stored on nodes, and nodes are simply computers that store the entire Bitcoin blockchain, which again, the blockchain is just a ledger of all the transactions. And it's very easy to actually set up a node yourself. And currently there are 70,000 plus nodes, mostly ran by individuals, not corporations. They are in over 163 countries, and the entire Bitcoin blockchain, the ledger of all the Bitcoin transactions since 2009, is only about 600 gigabytes. So you can store this on a Mac computer, you can store this on a Raspberry Pi. These are, you can really set one of these up yourself quite easily in under an hour. And what's beneficial about this is that it's very anti-fragile and it's very decentralized. So if one node fails, if one of these nodes fails, it goes down. Let's say a country bans Bitcoin, etc. It will actually not affect the blockchain. It won't affect all of where the Bitcoin transactions are stored, because it's stored in over 70,000 computers around the world. All right, and so what does peer-to-peer mean? So again, bringing up this diagram of a centralized system and a decentralized system, you could imagine that if you were in a centralized system and you had to pass a message to someone, quite literally just imagine you had an envelope in your hands and you were trying to give it to another person. It means that your envelope first must go through a central authority and then to the person that you desired to give that message to. In a decentralized system, your message can go directly to the person that you desire without it having to go through a centralized authority. And that's what Bitcoin is. There is no central authority of Bitcoin. All transactions are peer-to-peer. And so you can actually imagine, if you are an average American and you're trying to send a transaction to someone, your transaction actually goes through your bank first and then to the person that you desire. And so what is proof of work? Now, this is very important because this is the core thing that separates Bitcoin from almost every other cryptocurrency. Now, what that really just means is that mining Bitcoin has real life rewards and consequences. Okay? Running a Bitcoin miner costs a lot of money in electricity. Miners take on sometimes too much risk and they can lose a lot of money. Miners must show real life work and real life risk on the table to get that Bitcoin reward. And again, almost all other cryptocurrencies do not have the same model of proof of work. And that is what separates Bitcoin from so many other cryptocurrencies, which we will get into later in this episode, and there will actually be a full episode on this difference. And so again, going back to what these Bitcoin miners are doing. These Bitcoin miners are doing something called hashing. And Bitcoin miners make guesses, what they're called hashes, to find the matching key to each block. And so again, it's a random, unrelated puzzle that is attached to each block in the blockchain. And each computer, each one of these Bitcoin miners, makes 200 trillion guesses per second. These Bitcoin miners are called ASIC miners, and ASIC means application specific. So these miners are specifically used for only mining Bitcoin because they are designed to make as many of these guesses as possible to find the matching key to the lock. And you can imagine that that's the best way to think of what hashing is it is these computers trying to guess the matching key for a certain lock, and each lock is attached to each block of the blockchain. And I actually took an example here of a recent block that was mined, and you can see that the lock here is a humongous code string of letters and numbers, and that this was actually the matching key to that lock. And so you can imagine, with this amount of characters and this amount of options for each string of letter and number, just how hard it would be to guess one of these locks. And on top of that, there is something called the difficulty adjustment, where if a lot of these Bitcoin miners come online, then the locks actually begin to get harder. And so that prevents these miners from finding the block rewards in any time less than 10 minutes. So each block is about exactly 10 minutes, and that's what really keeps the blockchain going and being audited every 10 minutes. And so what's so important about proof of work is that not everyone wins this game. Again, there is real life rewards and consequences for mining Bitcoin. And here I have a list of the top public companies that mine Bitcoin. And you can see that some of these people, only the top 6 mining companies around the world, are profitable. Now, some of these companies are losing millions of dollars a year mining Bitcoin because they're taking on too much risk, right? So that is what is so important about proof of work, is that there is real life rewards and consequences for mining Bitcoin, okay? Proof of work is all founded on the concept that money should be easier to obtain by providing economic value than creating the money itself, okay? And so I want to go through some examples of what that looks like to really illustrate that point. And so seashells, this was actually the first form of proto-money before gold, silver, or fiat currencies ever existed. And so you can imagine being in a caveman-like society where seashells are the reward for providing goods and services to the community. And so if you're a caveman and you need to provide food and shelter for your society, and you're getting rewarded in seashells, you should be able to provide that food and shelter more easily than finding the seashells themselves. And so one of the reasons seashells failed as a currency was because when people were in dire need of food and shelter, people would actually go and just find seashells instead of providing food and shelter, right? It was easier to obtain the money than it was to provide economic value. And so dollars will inevitably fail because dollars are easier to obtain by simply printing them than it is to provide economic value. Now, all of these other cryptocurrencies will ultimately trend to zero against Bitcoin because all of these cryptocurrencies are based on proof of stake, which we will get into in another episode, and they are not proof of work. So all of these cryptocurrencies will inevitably trend to zero against Bitcoin because they are just printed. They are actually really not much different than fiat. While some good examples of this are Bitcoin, gold, and houses. And so we'll start with houses here. For most people, it is easier to go to your 9 to 5 job, work, provide economic value, and then have someone else build your house than you going and spending your whole time building a house, right? It's easier to work a job and have someone build your house for you than it is for you to build your house yourself. This is actually one of the reasons that helps create specialized economies. Gold. Gold is a great example of this because it is easier to, be a waiter, be a bartender, and get gold as a payment than it is to go and mine the gold yourself. If it was easier to go and mine the gold yourself and obtain the gold yourself, then no one would be working jobs because everyone would be mining gold, right? And this creates a diseconomy. Now, Bitcoin is the same thing, and it's actually the perfection of this idea because Bitcoin has a fixed issuance, which we'll get into soon, and it is easier to obtain Bitcoin by providing economic value and buying it than it is to create the Bitcoin, right? Because as we learned, many of these miners are not profitable. So, you let the specialized miner companies take care of that while you focus on providing goods and services. The issuance schedule of Bitcoin. So there is a max supply of 21 million Bitcoin. And this is what I think most people understand about Bitcoin and why people can see its value in it because it has a max supply. Obviously, there's going to be only predicted amounts of inflation every year. And so let's understand what that looks like. And so here you can see it's called asymptotically issued. So every 4 years, the amount of block reward, the amount of Bitcoin each miner gets paid, is cut in half every 4 years. And so over time, it will almost trend to where each miner is getting 0 Bitcoin until it hits 21 million coins. Okay? And so you can see it is deflationary. Its inflation rate goes down over time. And so here is also an example of what that looks like with its price. And so the initial block reward back in 2009 to 2012 was 50 Bitcoin per block, which is just unimaginable these days. And then it was cut in half to 25 Bitcoin, then 12.5 Bitcoin, then 6.25 Bitcoin. And now it's just like a hair over 3 Bitcoin per block that you get. And so this creates such an interesting economic effect because every time that Bitcoin blocks get cut in half, the price of Bitcoin theoretically would have to double for Bitcoin mining to stay as profitable as it is. And this is where, if that doesn't happen, you might see less miners come online. So then more Bitcoin per Bitcoin miner. And so it's just very interesting, this concept. It creates a very interesting economic effect where Bitcoin's price has to continue to go up over time because the halving. What is cryptography? And so I actually have a picture here of a cryptographer from World War II. And so messages in World War II were encrypted so enemies would not learn of the Allies' war plans and vice versa as well. And so all it really is it's scrambling messages. And so here's like a picture of what that would look like. If you're sending a message, you have A's get represented by D's, you get B's represented by E's. So the other side would see just a random string of letters and not know what it means. But if you have the key to decrypt that message, you then have a clear message and the other person should not know what message you're seeing. Now, Bitcoin uses a very highly complex cryptography called SHA-256, and that is meant to secure the coins to the wallet, the rightful owner's wallet. And these are actually the same types of cryptography that are used to secure US nuclear launch codes. So this is extremely hard to crack. It's almost impossible to crack a Bitcoin wallet. And so let's dive a little bit more into what a Bitcoin wallet is. And the best way to think of it is a username and password. And so you have a private key, which is a random 256 character string of letters and numbers. And then you have your public key, which is derived from your private key using elliptical curve math, which we won't get into, but it's impossible to go backwards from that. You can't go from a public key to a private key. You can only go from a private key to a public key. And then you have your Bitcoin address, which all that is a shortened version of your public key that's a little bit more readable and understandable to the human eye. And so I just illustrated an example of what that would look like using a mailbox as an example. So imagine you have a mailbox. Your private key is what unlocks your mailbox, and your public address, your Bitcoin address, is the number on your mailbox. And so if you think about this, it's impossible to go from your number to your key, right? That just means that someone can give you mail to your mailbox, but they can't actually figure out what your private key is. Only you can have that private key that unlocks your mailbox. And just to illustrate the idea of trying to guess a private key, it is, using today's standards, impossible. You have a higher chance of finding a grain of sand randomly placed on Earth than guessing a private key. And believe it or not, it's almost to the point where you have a higher chance of guessing a random atom in the entire universe than you do of guessing a private key. That's just how many combinations there are to private keys. Who runs Bitcoin? The best way to think about Bitcoin is actually like the United States Constitution. And so Bitcoin is run on nodes, which we learned what nodes were in this episode, right? It is just computers that store the Bitcoin ledger. And they all follow the same open source protocol, and no single person or group controls it. And its core functions really act like the United States Constitution, and it can only be changed if the community agrees to that change. And these changes are called Bitcoin improvement proposals. And so you can imagine a BIP, is what they're called for short, being like an amendment to the United States Constitution. There has to be consensus where everyone agrees to that change before the change can get implemented. What is the point of Bitcoin? The central point is that printing money out of thin air is actually how societies collapse. It erodes trust in the system that we live in. Printed money funds wars. It decreases your purchasing power. It makes food quality go down. It makes housing quality go down. It increases the interest rates, of course. It creates the need for social programs that really don't work, because you can imagine if everything is getting more expensive, that means the government needs to hand out more money because everything's getting more expensive, and it's this kind of infinite feedback loop that doesn't stop. And it also creates political division. So Satoshi created a genius way to force the incentives of not printing money. As we learned with proof of work, Bitcoin is always earned honestly, and it can never be printed. Bitcoin can never be debased. There will only be 21 million Bitcoin. And Bitcoin forces people and governments to act honestly, because you can imagine if the government didn't have a choice of printing money, as we learned in episode 1, they have 3 options. They can increase taxes, they can cut spending, or they can print money. If they don't have the option of printing money, then it means that they must use their resources more carefully and in more consensus with the United States population. And Bitcoin transactions can never be blocked or frozen. So, there's a saying, Bitcoin is money for your enemies. Bitcoin is money for everyone. And again, going back to the example of gold, gold failed because of the paper representations of gold. With Bitcoin, you can use the actual asset itself for transactions all the time. So you can verify instead of trusting. You don't have to trust that your paper representation for gold is actually there. you can just use the physical asset itself, right? And so Bitcoin, just highlighting this, is the evolution of money itself. Bitcoin is over 5,000 years of studying monetary history and computer science to get to the point where we have something like this. That is just how important it is. It truly is a once in a species opportunity. And I want to jump into my next episode a little bit to really highlight something that I think is so important, that Bitcoin is not crypto. Okay, Bitcoin is not crypto. People say, oh, Bitcoin is part of crypto. It's not. And so this is the perception that most people have, that Bitcoin is part of crypto. But in reality, Bitcoin is completely separate from crypto, and that actually most crypto is really just imitations of fiat. It is people trying to pump and dump their own meme coins and scam coins. And it really is, there's insider pre-mines, which we'll get into in another episode. But Bitcoin is so much different because of proof of work that it is not related to fiat or crypto in any way. Remember, this was the first ever form of a digital asset, and all of these other cryptocurrencies tried to copy it and inevitably are going to fail because of proof of stake. And so again, XRP, Ethereum, Tether, Solana, these are not forms of money, right? And these companies are actually very open about this idea. These are cryptographic technologies. These should really be listed on the stock exchange, and they are not assets like gold or silver. I wanted to create this chart real quick to highlight that. So I have up here what you would want to look for in your money, just characteristics of a quality money. You want something portable. You want it to be divisible. You want it to be fungible, which just means one unit is equal to the next unit. You want it to be durable over time. You want it to be decentralized. You don't want it to have a CEO or an owner, or it has to pass through a central authority. And you want it to be proof of work, because we learned about the importance of proof of work, that everything must be earned honestly. You don't want a CEO of your money. And you want it to have a largely addressable market, just like the United States dollar. Okay, and so XRP, all cryptocurrencies are very portable and divisible and somewhat fungible because many of them have a limited supply. So one unit is going to be equal to the next unit over time. But they may not be that durable. Many of these cryptocurrencies have actually gone through major changes. Ethereum had a complete change in 2023 where they switched from proof of work to proof of stake. And ever since then, it's been trending to zero against Bitcoin. And durability for XRP and Solana, these XRP had a huge issue with the SEC, and just now recently, over 10 years, they're finally getting ground again. Solana, we'll see where Solana goes, but it's not money, okay? And now these cryptocurrencies, they're all going to say they're decentralized. That's what they want you to believe. They are not decentralized. And I'll make this into an entire episode exposing points of why all these cryptocurrencies are not decentralized, and I have great examples of that. Now, none of these are proof of work. They are all proof of stake. They're open about that. They know that. And one of the reasons they think that proof of stake is a better concept than proof of work is because they think energy consumption is a problem. But energy consumption is what creates the high stakes environment for Bitcoin and gold for them to work like money. All of these other cryptocurrencies have CEOs. You don't want a CEO of your money. And Ethereum and Solana, they are really focused on smart contracts more than anything, which is not money. And so their addressable market is much smaller than what an actual money could be. Okay? And you can swap Tether for just the United States dollar. All it is that Tether is just more portable than the United States dollar. Tether is backed by the dollar. And you can see that Tether really has absolutely no future of being money. Solana does not have any future of being money. Ethereum and XRP really only have three of the focal points of money. So there's almost no future for these coins. They will trend to zero against Bitcoin. There's no question. Included gold on here because gold, one of the reasons it failed, which we discussed multiple times, is that it lacks portability and divisibility and thus had to be papered over for it to work properly. But gold will always, until the end of time, be a store of value because it is fungible, it is durable, it is decentralized, it is proof of work. You must have to go mining for gold to get it. That is why its inflation rate is so consistent over time and only increases by about 1% every year. There is no CEO of gold. There is no person who owns gold as the sole owner of gold, right? And its addressable market is enormous. It is a store of value asset for the entire world, and it's still what many central banks settle most of their money in. And now Bitcoin hits all of these boxes. It's portable, it's divisible, it's fungible, but most importantly, and it's very durable as well, it has never been hacked one time. Ethereum has been hacked, so that already has exposed, Ethereum to many flaws. Has a very large surface area for attack Ethereum. And what's so important about Bitcoin is that it's decentralized, truly, truly decentralized. Things cannot change with Bitcoin unless the entire community agrees to that change. And it's almost like this immovable object. It's slow, it's very mechanical, and it just works over time. And of course, just like gold, it's proof of work, right? That is by far the most important thing about Bitcoin, is that it must be earned honestly, and many people make a lot of money mining Bitcoin, just like gold, but also like gold, many people lose a lot of money by mining gold and Bitcoin. And there is no CEO of Bitcoin, right? Satoshi Nakamoto. No one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and no one ever will. I can promise you that. And its addressable market is enormous. It has an even larger addressable market than gold because it is more portable and divisible and could be used as a medium of exchange in the future. Right now, it's primarily a store of value, but it will become a medium of exchange in the future. I just want to finish off this episode with a great quote from the economist Hayek, written in 1984. I don't believe we shall ever have a good money again before we can take it out of the hands of government. We can't take it violently out of the hands of government. All we can do is by some sly, roundabout way introduce something they can't stop. And I believe that thing they can't stop is Bitcoin. All right. Again, I'm Kyle with Orange Focus Media. Please like and subscribe for more educational content. And thank you for watching my introductory series, The Search for the Hardest Money. In the next episode, we are going to be looking into, again, why Bitcoin is so much different than other cryptocurrencies. Thank you, and I hope I see you there.